Hey, welcome back to Fat Mama Physics. In this video, we're going to talk about order of operations with rational numbers. I'm a little far away right now because I do have a board game set up that I will introduce as to reinforce some of the concepts in this video with order of operations. So let's begin. This board game is called Twilight Struggle. It is a political game. It's a 1v1 for 2 players. So my husband and I love to play this a lot. So let me transfer over to my phone. Okay, so let me just get a big game here. All right, here's the board. This is what it looks like. Twilight Struggle. It's I guess you might have seen here. It is based off the history of the Cold War, and if you know a little bit about the Cold War, it's pretty much a war between the Soviet Union and the United States, as represented by the red and the blue here. And here is the massive board that I have. It's the board of the entire map of the world. And if I zoom in here, there's many things we can take a look at. Here is USSR, which is Russia, and then here we have the USA here. There's many tokens, as you can see, and many countries, as there's numbers. Okay, what do they all mean? First of all, notice the red tokens. The red tokens are countries that are controlled by the USSR. I just set this up as an example here. Blue is for the United States. So for any sort of token here, you can see how if you flip the token over, it's the blank side, and then here is the colored side, and that has to do with whether or not a country either has presence in a country or controls that country. So what that means is, notice that there are numbers at the top of every country. It's the number of influence markers you need there to control the country, or the difference between you and your opponent. So for example, Austria, here I have 4. 4 is enough to control Austria. Let's say the United States has a single presence here in Austria. I need to look at the difference between USSR and the States to see whether or not the USSR has control. Here they don't, because the difference is 3. In that case, this would have to get flipped over. They no longer have control here. So for USSR to regain Austria, they would need to have 5 in order to control Austria like that. Okay, so that's the idea of control and non-control. So this game is played through 3 stages, called early war, mid-war, and late war. So there are 3 stages. The USSR player and the US player plays cards back and forth to determine whoever wins. I oftentimes play this with my husband. Do I have a preference? Not really. The game is relatively balanced in terms of who plays what. So it's a tricky business, and sometimes depends on the order of the cards that turn up, whether you get your opponent's cards or you get your own cards, or kind of like that. Okay, so what does this all have to do with the order of operations? Did I forget to mention anything? Oh yes, how to win this game. You win this game by there's a victory point tracker, which I forgot to put the marker here. So basically, if this tracker goes all the way here, with the US having more points than the USR player at any point, US automatically wins. Any point during the game, same thing with the USSR. So if there's a point differential of 20, then automatically the other player wins. There's another condition here, is whenever, say, a particular superpower controls Europe, meaning they control all battleground countries, which is labeled by the bolded, the dark purple countries here. If all battleground countries are controlled and more, and basically if you control a lot of the countries here in Europe, you win. And it's specifically Europe and not all the other places. Or at the end of the game, you track victory points. Whoever has the most victory points at the end of the game wins. It is a very long game, but it's very satisfying when you're playing it, and it potentially is able to break relationships. So it's one of those, if your couple can play through this game without breaking up, it means you have a good bond together. So yes, my husband and I are still together, but yes, I love this game. He's okay with it. Okay, so let's begin. So why does it have to do with the order of operations? Well, the one of the things that is important in this game is the timeline. The timeline is very important because according to history, certain things have to happen in order for events later on to happen. So here I have some examples. Early war events must happen first, mid-war, then late war. If you take a look at early war, here I have an example of some of these big events that happened in history. I'm not a history person, but for example, here I have a card called NATO, which it is early war. It's Notice it can only be played after the Marshall Plan or the Warsaw Pact has been played. So it's these cards. So if these cards have not been played, the person who wants to play NATO cannot play NATO. Okay, so that's the interesting thing. There has to be a specific order of which cards are played in order for their effects to take effect. There are certain cards later in the game that actually cancel earlier events as well. So, for example, in Late War, there's a card called the Iron Lady. Maybe you'll know the historical reference here, and she cancels the effect of the socialist governments as by the USSR player. So notice that there's a specific order of which cards, if they're played, they have specific effects, just like how timeline in history works. Order of operations, order matters. Next up is the idea of when you solve order of operations questions, it oftentimes you have to do things. It's easier to group numbers together to solve them first, one step at a time. I think of it as divide and conquer. And that's kind of like when you take influence. If you're trying to gain influence in certain countries, you have to gain, you kind of have to divide the other superpowers, divide their power and conquer them one on one. This map doesn't do as good of a job as I was trying to explain earlier, but here I have an example. There's a specific military operation, there's a specific action called a realignment roll, which of course has to do with these dice. Red by the USSR, blue by the US player. So what is a realignment roll? Here I set up an example here. Let's take a look at Italy. So for example, actually, you know what? Let me just trade this one away because I was going to explain something earlier, but I can't. Let's do this. Oh, I know. Let's do this. Let's have 4 here and 2 here. Okay, so let's say this is a setup. So obviously, the US player has control of Italy because the difference between the influence of the blue and the red is 2, which is exactly the stability in the country, which is 2 in Italy. Lots of references there. So, for example, the USSR player can do something called a realignment roll. The realignment roll basically kind of shifts the balance of the power in, say, a specific country. They can choose Italy. And the interesting about realignment rolls is that if this player controls countries that are adjacent to Italy, they get an advantage in the roll. So what happens in realignment roll is that the USSR player and the US player both roll a dice. And let's say this is the roll. Wow, that's a big roll there. So if that's the roll there, then what happens is we take the difference of the 2 and then we subtract it from the opposing player's influence. But notice how the USSR player has 2 countries that he or she has under control beside Italy. So the USSR actually gains 2 more points in the realignment roll, which makes that a total of 8. So 8 minus 4 is 4. That actually takes away this entire influence from the US player away, and allowing the USSR player to gain control of Italy over there. So that's kind of the idea of divide and conquer. Like you're kind of zooming in, you're kind of like you're kind of narrowing, you're kind of doing some sort of like a two-pronged attack on a certain country. So you're dividing and conquering. You're attacking one kind of country at a single time. You're dividing the power and making it easier for you to conquer. And that's exactly what you want to do in doing order of operations with very complex numbers. You're breaking it down and you're tackling them one-on-one. Whew, there are so many rules here that are very cool. There's the action of the coup. You can coup in a certain country, which affects the stability of the whole world, which then could bring the whole country, the whole world into nuclear war. There's so many cool things about this game. I won't be able to talk about all of them. Feel free to check it out later. But that's the idea. I thought this was a great example of order of operations. Thank you for watching this one. Time to pack up the game and go back to our lesson. Alright, now we're back with order of operations with rational numbers to our actual lesson. So let's start doing some examples. And again, I'm going to reiterate on the fact that order matters, which is, remember Twilight Struggle, historical events all happen in a particular order, as well as dividing and conquering, and how to do that with, say, these examples. First of all, before we begin, BEDMAS. We have to apply BEDMAS when we do order of operations, meaning that whenever you have a series of different operations, you must follow the order of which these go. So for example, you need to do your brackets first. If there's brackets, always do the brackets first. If there's exponents, do that next. Then division, multiplication, addition, and subtraction. Those will go later. Okay, important to follow the order, just like the historical events must happen in order. So let's do example 1 together. And let's see. First of all, you might say, oh, there's some brackets there. What do we do with that? And I mean, the brackets, they're just, it basically is trying to say that that is one number. The negative sign is part of that number. So don't forget that. And doesn't seem like there's any brackets. Doesn't seem there's any exponents. Doesn't seem there is division and multiplication. So maybe we should do that first. And this is where I get to talk about dividing and conquering. So what is probably a good idea is that there's division, subtraction, and multiplication. I would try to group the numbers together, especially if they're being divided and multiplied, because I want to do them first before I subtract numbers. So these two are being divided. I need to do that first before I do any sort of subtraction. These two numbers here are being multiplied. I need to do those first before I subtract the numbers. So let's do this together. Notice I'm dividing and conquering each part of the equation, of the expression at a single time. So I have negative 2.4 divided by 1.2. Off the bat, I know that's going to give me 2. But if you want to, we can double check with a calculator. 2.4 divided by 1.2, that's going to give me 2. You might notice I didn't put a negative sign because I know my answer is going to be negative. This is going to give me negative 2. And if I want, I can put that in bracket just so I remember. Subtract whatever 7 times 0.2 is. I could do it in my head, or I could put it in the calculator. Most of you, if you put it in the calculator, that is fine. 1.4, okay? So I have negative 2 minus 1.4, which is exactly the same as me adding these two numbers up and slapping the negative sign in front. So that's going to be negative 3.4. That's my final answer. Notice I divided and conquered, just like in Twilight Struggle. Haha. Okay, next up over here we have B. Hey, there is an exponent in here. So we do make sure we have to do the exponent first. You know what? Maybe it's a good time for you to try this problem. There's brackets, exponents, and multiplication. Be careful which one goes first. Always the brackets go first. So look at the order. Give good time to try this problem. Pause the video. Okay, I will do this one with us together. We have some brackets which we probably need to resolve first. So let's take 3.4 minus 0.6, which is effectively negative 34 minus plus 0.6. I'm just going to slap a negative sign in front. Negative 2.8 plus 4 squared times 0.2. Okay, now we're done with the brackets. Here, let's just put that in brackets just to show that. And next up, we need to do exponents, which is the 4 squared. Our 4 squared is going to be 16. 4 times 4 is 16 times 0.2. Okay, next up, we need to do multiplication first. 16 times 0.2. If we want, we can check it. Otherwise, it should be 3.2. Okay, oopsies. This is what happens when things... So 3.2, there you go. We get negative 2.8 plus 3.2. And if we add these two together, this is going to give us a remainder of 0.4. So 3.2 minus 2.8 gives us 0.4. Okay, next up here. Okay, you know what? This might be a good time for you to try this problem. Please pause the video. Okay, so let's do this one together. Again, divide and conquer, but don't forget, with the BEDMAS, division comes before multiplication. So notice that there is a division sign here. We gotta do the division first before we do the multiplication. Keep everything else the same, negative 0.8 plus 1.2 divided by 0.3. That should give us about 4. If you want, we can always double check. And that answer is going to be negative 4 since this number here is negative. Negative 4 times 1.5. Multiplication is going to be next. So if we take negative 4 and we multiply it by 1.5, this is also going to give us a negative number, negative 6 here. And since subtracting, this is basically two numbers that are negative, you add them, you're going to get a more negative number. So negative sign, 0.8 plus 6 is going to be 6.8, adding the two negatives together. Okay, number D, last one. Just be careful, there's some brackets here. You got to do that before your exponents. Also a good time to pause the video and try this yourself. Okay, so doing the brackets first while keeping everything else the same. I have 0.7 minus negative 1.2. I have two negatives. That's the same as me adding the two numbers. 0.7 plus 1.2 is going to give me 1.9. The whole thing, don't forget, is squared. And that's exactly what I got to do next. So 1.9 squared is going to give me 3.61. 3.61. Write everything in before doing the next step here. I have a division. I have to divide 0.9 with 3.61. Just be careful, there's a negative sign there we don't want to leave out. So negative 3.2 in brackets minus 0.9 divided by 3.61. Okay, that's going to give us a very large number, 0.2493. 0.2493 ... and that's just to show that the decimal is the decimal keeps going. So next step, I have two numbers. They're both negative, so I'm only going to get a more negative number. So effectively, I can add 0.2493 with 3.2 and just slapping the negative in front afterwards. I get 3.4493 negative 3.3393 4493, and that's 0. You know what? I'm just gonna write ... I've decided to round this off to a 3 because notice the digit right afterwards is a 0. It's pretty close to 3.4493, so I'll leave it as that. So if when you're doing this one, I'm not going to penalize you based off what you rounded off to. It should be reasonable, at least two decimal places. And never round in middle of a question. Always round at the very last step, even if it means you writing down all those digits or having your calculator save it somehow. Okay? So, you know what? This video has been pretty long. I'm going to pause there, and I'm going to do the rest of the video with the rest of this lesson material. Thank you for watching. Good luck. I will see you on part 2. In part 2, Fat Mama Physics signing out.